Let's go beyond the connection. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, the host. And today we've got a super interesting conversation. We have on Adam Krob. Adam, you are the Director of Information Technology at a large construction company, which I'm going to let you go into a little bit more about your background there. But one of the things that, and you've been doing it for a long time, but one of the things that was interesting about in our past conversations that I learned is that you married someone from Germany, you lived in Germany, worked in Germany, and you are proficient in the German language. I want to let you explain a little bit more about all of that, and then we'll dive right in because the topic today is how to overcome challenges and seize opportunities in construction technology. But let's talk a little bit more about your background before we get started.
Sure. And to start with, Steve, you and I have both been doing this a long time. I think in 1989, I ran my first file and print network that was a Novell network on a token ring over coax. So if you've done token ring over coax, you're definitely one of my people. The other thing that you mentioned about German is that it's just a real passion of mine. This last year, I accomplished a goal that I'd set a while back of getting an intermediate 2 certification, which is a B2 certification in the German language. And I've just interacted with German and Germany for a very long time. Part of my graduate school experience was there. I met my wife there. She was on the same program and is actually an American, but she met me from New Orleans. And so we had to go several thousand miles away to meet one another and have worked in Germany and just something that I really love. I love my family that's in Germany, and it's just a real passion of mine.
I know one of your other passions is in information technology and success that you've been creating over the years. I want to start with a big question, which is if you had to outline what are the key challenges in construction technology that you're constantly having to work through and address, what would those be?
It really centers around data and both the quality of the data and the amount of the data. So let me start with the quantity of the data. Is that what we've seen over the last several years is the amount of data that we're producing to create really amazing projects continues to increase very quickly. So I want to give you a couple of examples of things that we never had done before, but now we do regularly. So the first thing that I wanted to mention was in our concrete pour process, we have created a standard operating procedure where we use our laser scanners 3 different times to make sure the embedded tie downs for whatever it is that we're fixing to the concrete slab are in the right place. We do it before the pour, we do it during the pour, and we do it afterwards. So we get it. So we're collecting that data and it's like a point cloud. It's a lot of data. The other example, and this is on the sort of the horizontal construction side in civil construction, is that we're starting to see use of fixed laser scanners in specific locations. And one job where we have what's called a total station, which is a laser scanner basically watching a flood wall as we work near it to make sure that it's not deforming more than we need it to deform. And it's not just here, but it's all over the world. I was in Portugal last summer and we were walking through Porto and I pointed up to my wife. I said, "That's a total station. They are watching that wall of that medieval building to see whether it's about to fall down." So when you think about that, that the amount of data that we're capturing, like you think about the sort of the data pyramid, data, information, knowledge, wisdom, that the amount of data that we're producing continues to get greater and greater. And one of the reasons why we need to do more technology in construction is making sure we're getting people access to the right information at the right place at the right time, because that's really what drove us to do a lot of the technology innovations that we've done, is that getting that information to the field at the right time is really important. But as that amount of data starts getting greater and greater, we start seeing more significant challenges with that. Whether it's at a job trailer where we have a relatively constrained connection, or if we're working somewhere where we really don't have any connectivity other than potentially cellular in the middle of a bayou or driving miles, it becomes a real challenge. So we have to think about and understand, how do we get that information to the right people at the right time.
So I want to dig deeper in that. So
Yeah.
it's so easy to understand the amount of data is doing nothing but growing and growing. I used to, in the day, long time ago, I used to work with CJ Technologies, and we kept wondering how big do our hard drives have to get before people don't want any more space? That was that mentality back then. So I get the idea of this expanding need for data, and this expanding need for connectivity from the field to the home office. You have the clients, the GCs, and you've got contractors, subcontractors, you've got everybody, and often very dispersed. How do you think about creating the network and bringing a network together that connects them, that's resilient, always connected, failovers, all the things that we need to be thinking about?
I like to think about it in two different ways. One is we really like to think about the multiplicity of connectivity options. It's very important that we provide backups to backups. That if we're in the field, we need to make sure that there's a backup. Oftentimes, we have a sort of a commodity connection to a basic business connection to a landline, but we also want to make sure we have either a satellite or we have a cellular backup. We have started deploying also specific receivers and specific tools that have multiple SIM cards for multiple providers because we find that in certain locations, some of the providers are much better than other providers. Think about that as okay, we need to hedge our bets a little bit in terms of actually getting them connected. In big offices, there's nothing that compares to a fiber connection. We have to have that big pipe. We really need that big pipe, particularly for the design side, because we're really working with really big files. In one project that we worked on this last year, we had to divide the 3D model into 4 different pieces to be able to actually upload it and move it around because it was that big. And it's just the amount is really stunning. And the number of people that we're having to collaborate with is also really stunning. But to get back to your question, we also need to understand how are we using and identifying tools that facilitate that transmission in the best way possible. And I think about that in sort of two different ways. One is we need to start thinking more and more, particularly at the scale that we're at, of using a platform. So we need to operate in the same platform, that we can't have dispersed systems because we're creating then more bottlenecks. If we're providing data from this system to this system, it's tremendous because we might get the best possible solution for all three of those. But from a practical perspective of moving that data around, we created 2 additional bottlenecks that we didn't have if we were living all in that same platform, and I think we need to be evaluating what platforms we're using and which one really shares that the best. And the second is we need to think about offline because there are times that we need to have offline mode, and we need to make sure that our tool sets are capable of that offline mode and then resynchronizing when they get back to a better connection. And we have situations like that. We had a tool that does this process called BIM collaboration, and like it's a collaborative environment, and it does this process where we are looking at the model really early on to say, okay, here are the electrical contractors, here are the plumbing contractors, here are the mechanical contractors. We're all working in the same model. And then we're saying, okay, if you move your Jace here, it's going to run into this electrical conduit. We can't have that. So we need to find out where that is. And so we have to bring everybody together into that same model, and we have a system now that as that work is going on, then we have the ability to be immediate and work together collaboratively and see everybody's work. But as we move into the field, we can then go offline and we can provide the degree of detail that is so helpful for us when we're actually building and we're sitting on an iPad and we're looking at it offline.
It's amazing the offline mode. You're in the home office, you got to have that huge pipe, but you're in multi locations most of the time. You're distributed most of the time. Two important questions. I'm going to ask them one at a time. How do you think about the complexity of bringing that network together? Is that one of your biggest challenges? Are you trying to constantly reduce the complexity? You talked about one platform, multiple systems, and you're creating roadblocks. Just complexity to simplicity. How important is that? How much of your mind and time on the job are you thinking about how do I reduce the amount of complexity I have in the system?
I think that you hit the nail on the head that I do spend a lot of time worrying about complexity because I feel like that every time we add complexity, not just at that moment, but going forward forever. It's like when you customize an application, that customization lives not only in that one time that you make the customization, but every single time you test that application. If we can find ways where we can get 90% of the same functionality in a tool that easily integrates or that out of the box integrates with our primary project management platform, we're going to absolutely weight that more. And the other thing too is you think about complexity from the back end, but I also think about complexity from the front end when climbing up the OSI model is that in the field, the team needs to have relatively consistent inputs and consistency in the interface. And so interface design in a platform actually also contributes to reduction in time to proficiency, reduction in frustration of what the heck they moved that. Like Microsoft, please stop moving these things in Excel. But we have to think about that because each one of those additional systems is an additional amount of change readiness that we consume on the part of our teams. And their job isn't to be able to be proficient in 15 apps. Their job is to build really cool and really amazing things.
When you seek that simplicity, one of the things that can happen is every time you put in a new tool, it has unanticipated impacts somewhere else. You're like, oh, shoot. So there's so much to drive the simplicity, yet you've got so many tools, so many vendors that are out in the market, and no one person or department can be an expert in all of that. Like, how do you wade through that complexity to arrive at simplicity? What's your process to do that?
So we really do think about weighting that simplicity in our decision making when we start looking at different tools. And we do think about it from the front end and the back end. Sometimes you can't avoid it and you have to build something relatively complex, but oftentimes we think first about platform. I do. I think first about platform. I think about data integrations and I think about front end kinds of considerations as well, training and interface. I have pretty good buy-in from the team that they're focused on making sure that the experience, both front end and back end, is relatively seamless. And we also have all gotten bitten by the complexity bug, and I've seen the impact of it. So I have a lot of really nice buy-in from the executive team saying, let's not get something complicated. Can we make that simpler and pushing back reasonably so and saying, look, we're not ready for that now. And sometimes it's not, we're not ready for it, but we're not ready for it now. And so sometimes we can add complexity or new tools, and we tend to try to do that in a relatively thoughtful way. So if we have a big program, a big project that's starting up, we'll often say, okay, we've got something new coming onto that. So we can more easily add that changed process or tool to that job than trying to jackhammer out what we used to do and put it back into an existing project.
So, one thing that's working against you in this complexity to simplicity goal, and you mentioned it, because we're so distributed and we're sometimes in very remote areas, we're looking at ISPs, number of
Mhm.
ISPs, SIM cards, satellite, and then we've got the connected opportunities. And so that's growing. That complexity is growing, and you're almost forced to embrace it because you have to. What are the solutions in the marketplace that you see, or are there good solutions in the marketplace that help you take that end of the complexity and make it more simple?
So one thing that's been very interesting is that the carriers, the traditional carriers, the network carriers, are diversifying their offerings. And so they are offering not only a fiber connection or a copper connection, but also a 5G connection or starting to look at providing satellite as well. So I think that one thing that's working in our benefit is they have found that as network connectivity has gotten more commoditized, that they need to live in a broader section of that market. And so I think the best ones are starting to package it well. And the one thing that I haven't talked about in terms of complexity is also billing and management and all of those sorts of things too, which the complexity of that is increasing as well, because not only are we having to track bills from our traditional providers, but from wireless providers and satellite providers. And we're really looking to the industry to provide us more holistic and some really cool things. Some people that are doing some neat things that are very helpful for us in the field. One vendor that we work with has a tool that if they lose connectivity with our router, they have a little system on the side that talks to the cellular that power cycles the router. How many times do we just say, turn it off and turn it back on again? But it's a really great little tool. It's a very smart piece of automation that can be very helpful, particularly when we're working in the field with people who I'm not expecting them to understand the complexity of a security appliance that's sitting on their desk. It just works or it doesn't, and their expectation is it's going to work because they've got work to do. If we're not on, then they're not doing work and we're not making money.
If we're not on thing, there have been studies that have come out recently that showed that in a multi-location environment, I think it was 6% of those companies experience an outage at least once a month, if not more.
And it's so challenging. And part of it too is in different locations in the country, the network infrastructure is better than others. And I'm very hopeful with some of the work that's gone on rural fiber networks. I know in Louisiana, we have a very big project company that I know is doing a lot of that work. And that to me is really exciting because that's not only positive for those of us who have the fiber connections to our home office, but also to the pole, to the 4 and 5G antennas. So we're going to have better connectivity as we have better fiber elsewhere. And we all know the 4G always followed like the maps of the cities and the interstates and went out from there. And similar type of thing, but with rural fiber, I think we're going to see additional opportunities for us to get better connectivity in more remote locations, even if it's not hardwire, because eventually everything comes back to hardwire. I think you and I were talking earlier and laughing about when wireless networks first came out, we were building buildings and people would say, "You don't need a wiring closet, do you?" Like, no, we still need a wiring closet, even though we're primarily doing wireless. It's all got to go back to the wire somewhere because it's not reasonable for us to think that this is somehow magical internet dust in the air. It's not magical internet dust in the air.
You bring up a point. There's this idea of wireless first and where the industry is going with that. First, what does that mean to you? What does wireless first mean to you?
What one thing that means to us is that we understand that our workforce is not a fixed place ever. Even the people who primarily come into the office, we don't anticipate that they live in a fixed place. One thing that we have learned a great deal about is about hurricanes in New Orleans. We've been through this many times and we have very few desktop computers. We have a few that are dedicated to particular tasks or are in job trailers, but everyone from our payable accounts payables team to our project managers to our executives, they have a device that they can take with them, get on either a Wi-Fi connection, or in the case of many of them, also use cellular connection. That when you think wireless first, we think that in our industry, but also in our location, we can't think of people as connecting in place.
So, from an industry perspective as well. So, the industry is trending towards wireless first. What do you want from your industry partners in this kind of wireless first trend future? What is it that you're looking for?
So that's a good question. I think that what we're looking for is thinking about the constraints that wireless puts on us from a data perspective as well. To get back to our original point, is there a way for us to bring data to information and make the entire package smaller as we're delivering it across networks that are more constrained and busier. We need to make sure that we're packaging it in the right way. I think that as we're moving up the chain of delivering not just data, but information and hopefully knowledge and maybe every once in a while wisdom, we need to get those packages smaller and provide that information in a way that is compatible with networks that maybe are not as constrained. But also, giving it to us in a much more clean and much better state is really important to us as well. Like, we need to, in the last 5 or 6 years where we've been talking about machine learning and now, of course, AI, the entire process of ETL with the transform, taking data, cleaning it up, determining whether it can be cleaned, and then getting some sort of insight out of it has become, again, the other side of the coin of that challenge is that we're delivering the data. There's a lot more data that we're delivering, but how much of it is good and how much of it is clean and how much of it is ready to be processed? And I think that's something also that we are very interested in when we talk to our partners about understanding how they're providing us data back. If we're providing data back into a platform, where we're visualizing that, where we're getting analytics out of it, where we're then delivering it to multiple different members of the ecosystem, we need to have that data be reliable. And how are we checking that? How are we auditing it? And what are the ways that we can do that better? And partners, you all need to help me with that.
That's great. There is still this big perception in the industry that I can't rely on wireless. Yet it sounds like you're already relying on wireless. What do you tell the people that are like, no, I'm not a believer yet. I'm a wait and see? What do you tell them?
I tell them that we're in a situation in a world where, and not just particular to my industry, that we're gathering data in so many different places. For example, one of the tools that we use that's very valuable is we have ultrasonic monitors inside of our tanks for gasoline, for diesel, at many different locations. And we use a tool that does a line of sight wireless connection back to a cellular bridge, and there's really no way to get away without doing that wireless. We're not going to run a wire to every single one of our tanks in the middle of our layout yard. It's just not feasible. It's not cost effective, but also it doesn't make sense because you know what? Some of those are on trucks and we're moving them around. And so we need the capability to be able to use those in different ways in different locations. And it's great to have a really beautiful fiber connection. I love it. I sit in a building that has a really nice one and in fact redundant ones, but it's also not perfect. And like it's a lot of us this last year experienced what would happen when one of the major providers had a data center in Houston that lost power for several days and a major provider was not providing network connectivity over their fiber network for multiple days.
I guess to come right back around to this is we have to rely on wireless. It is reliable. So I guess your recommendation to the industry is rely on what's already reliable. Is that a good way to say it? How would you say that?
And also, look at the behavior of the next generation. They are not wired at all. My daughter in college, she does not have an Ethernet cable in her room. There's an Ethernet port, but she does not have an Ethernet cable in her room. She does not have it. I asked her if she wanted it, and she said, I do not need that, Dad. And so the next generation, it's not only do they find it reliable, but they find it to be an absolute necessity because they are living their lives more and more in a form factor that does not make sense with wired connectivity. If you're living your life and you're doing so many more things on a device that you carry in your hand, you're not going to find that very satisfactory to go in and plug into the wall every once in a while and download what you need to do. It's simply not going to be acceptable. And also, I think associated technologies are going to make that even more prevalent. So the improvement in battery technology, which I think is one of the things that is most exciting. there's some really exciting things coming out about that. There are some German companies that are doing some really amazing things with making much longer lasting lithium batteries that can hold more, where several houses in my neighborhood do not have generators. They have large lithium ion batteries on their walls, and they're charging that with their solar panels. And we're using a great deal of that technology in the field. We have for a very long time. Solar cameras have been a standard with wireless connectivity on construction sites for years. And we can do more and more with them, and it's even more exciting. One of the things that I love about it is that we can start applying against that algorithms that check to make sure that nobody's standing in the swing of a crane, or that everybody has their hard hat on, or we can really see where our stockpiles are when we need to go to work next week. All of that relies on that wireless technology and making sure that it's ubiquitous and really anticipating that it be reliable. But again, you also have to hedge your bet.
Adam, we've talked about a lot, and our poor human brains can't retain more than about two or three things at a time. If you were able to sum it all up and say, for the audience that's watching this podcast, what's the one most important takeaway that you want them to have?
So it relates to the volume of information. And we've talked about this so many times and for so long that the volume of information is increasing at a sort of astounding rate, particularly in my industry. As we have things that are amazing, the point clouds that were used to create the Assassin's Creed game were used to reconstruct Notre Dame Cathedral. That it's really interesting use case of that amount of data. But what really is important to me about this entire communication is that we're seeking to not just deliver data, that we really feel like we need to be able to have that connectivity so that we can connect real experience to job. So we do something with our jobs where we do a walk once a month through with senior superintendents and senior project managers, and we all look at the same things and we all ask questions and we all give those answers. We live stream that, and we allow anybody anywhere to be part of that conversation because we want that wisdom from years and years of building to be able to connect to a job site that maybe we never even visit. And that distributed character of our work and the degree of knowledge that some of our most senior people have, getting those two together is really important. And I think that these kinds of technologies that we use to drive our ability to convey some of those insights in the field, that to me is just incredible.
Here's one thing that I know is going to happen. People are going to have more questions. Is it okay if we give out a link to your LinkedIn profile that people could reach out?
You can absolutely put a link in my LinkedIn profile. Please reach out. I muse on LinkedIn a lot. Feel free to ask me about crazy things, or if you want to just set up some time and have a bit of a broader chat, I'd love to talk to you.
Thank you so much. It helps. We rarely talk to our own peers in our own industry. And it really helps to understand, what do you think the biggest challenges are? How are you thinking about solving them, reducing complexity, everything we talked about today. It's all part of, if we share, then we all become part of that rising tide that lifts the boats. So I appreciate you helping us raise some more boats today.
Well, Steve, I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you and to also look forward to chatting with a lot more people about the same kind of challenges.